A reading from the 21st chapter of Luke, beginning with verse 5 and ending with verse 9. One day, people were standing around talking about the temple, remarking how beautiful it was, the splendor of its stonework and memorial gifts. Jesus said, "All this you're admiring so much? The time is coming when every stone in that building will end up in a heap of rubble." They asked him, "Teacher, when is this going to happen? What clue will we get that it's about to take place?" Jesus said, "Watch out for the doomsday deceivers. Many leaders are going to show up with forged identities claiming, 'I'm the one,' or 'the end is near.' Don't fall for any of that. When you hear of wars and uprisings, keep your head and don't panic. This is routine history and no sign of the end." This is the word of God for the people of God. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. So while I get set up, let me just say, I forgot to say this at the first service, but Kevin Benjamin, thank you for inviting me to preach. Boy, I tell you, I've been sweating bullets this whole week. It's like, man, I'm out of practice, And then to the congregation, know that I got in one of my tunnel visions moments when I was picking hymns. And Thursday night, when Rob's going over them with us, he said, "Oh, the first hymn, we're going to march into 3-2 time." And I thought, oh my goodness, I should have picked something 4-4. But you guys did just fine with that. Thank you. And then the second hymn I knew was a stretch. Some of you might be familiar with it or not. And then I picked the last one. And I'm like, yes, I'm ready to go. And then choir's going, "What's this?" So the last hymn we'll have fun with, okay? Now, Kevin, thank you for letting me preach. The first service I got to do communion, which I have always loved to do. What I'm missing is a children's sermon. So in the middle of this sermon, you're going to get a children's sermon as an illustration. How's that? But to start, in honor of our Reverend Kevin Benjamin, I'd like to start with a story. There was an Episcopal priest who loved to do children's sermons. And so he had sat down and the kids were gathered around him. And of course, underneath his vestments, you could see his clerical collar. And so he was talking about things that clergy wear. And he pointed to this clerical collar and he says, "So why do I wear a clerical collar?" And the kids threw out these crazy understandings. And there's this one kid, can you picture him? The one that can't sit still. It's like, oh, call on me, call on me. So he did. He said, "It keeps ticks and fleas away for 30 days. Oh, yes. Children are wonderful. I can imagine that young child had seen many commercials about tick and flea collars on television. And so we tend to see the world around us or what we hear that's coming in our ears based upon what we've seen and heard most recently or what we've been exposed to a lot. So then I think about this gospel lesson, and they're coming in and they're admiring this beautiful temple, the stone, and in this translation, I love it, the memorial gifts. Let me tell you, memorial gifts can be a real headache for the trustees and the clergy. It's like, what do we do? How do we acknowledge, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. But, a beautiful place like this sanctuary can bring one closer to God. But Jesus sensed something more was going on. They just weren't feeling closer to God. They were like clinging to the temple. So good old Jesus does what he always does. He just wants to interrupt that thought. Let me tell you, the stones you see are going to be a pile of rubble. Well, where do we go first? We want to know. We want to be on the inside because we want to determine what we need to do when that end time comes. So they ask the question, when's that going to be? What are the clues? What are the signs? And Jesus, his response is to try to get us out of that mindset and back to being centered on God. Not worrying about the buildings, the signs, what's going on in the world, but being worried about, am I living my life from being centered upon God? I guess I need to back up. Yeah, I couldn't do a whole sermon right there. No. To be centered on God. To find that centering place from which we can live knowing God is with us. So then I went back to the story around the clerical collar. And what is a clerical collar a symbol of? And I thank George Athill. He's got his on this morning. Thank you, good sir. A couple weeks ago, Carolee and I had to go to outside of Chicago for her sister-in-law's celebration of life service. And on the way home, we stopped to see a nephew and family in the Pittsburgh area. And then the next morning, a Sunday morning, we were traveling and we stopped at the Flight 93 Memorial in Western Pennsylvania. We spent 3 hours there being very moved. But there is a photograph of an Episcopal priest with his collar kneeling in prayer at the site. You know, the clerical collar has long been an identifier of someone of faith, someone that you look to in times of trouble or difficulty, someone that you hope will bring a presence that helps you get through that. A collar is a symbol of faith, you know, and now that I'm retired, it's like, well, maybe I should have worn one when I was active, but I never did. Faith. But what is faith? What's a definition of faith? Well, early in my ministry here at Newark United Methodist Church, there was a day when Jerry Swally came up to me, and I don't remember if it was in my office or after a service right here, but he asked me, what is faith? And I'm like, no, I don't want to do that. It's too hard to describe. Well, we talked for a while, and then he said, well, this is my definition of faith. You ready for it? This is the one I consider a better scholar than me is going to give me the definitive answer about faith. Trust. In other words, trust in God. Say that with me. Trust in God. Trust in God. And in that moment, I realized that's something I have always done. Trusted in God. It's like it's an ingrained part of me. In fact, early in my ministry here, when I took the Strength Finder, I learned that one of my top strengths was connectedness. And this is part of the definition. Sensitive to the invisible hand. I wonder what they're talking about there. Your faith is strong. It sustains you and your close friends in the face of life's mysteries. It's always been a part of me, this faith, this trusting in God. I guess I was just gifted with a gift to have faith, to trust God. And because of that trusting God, I know something. I know this. I never face anything alone. Now, I can say I am so thankful that Carolee is my wife. You know, she helps me every day to really hold on to this trusting in God, okay? I am thankful I have this faith community that I get to participate in and be a part of, because your smiling faces and sometimes grumpy faces, they remind me as a community we sustain and support each other to trust in God. But ultimately it comes to that last words, to trust in God. Say that with me. Trust in God. And right now we should be dancing and hopping and, me doing one of my crazy things around the sanctuary, okay? To trust in God. And I realized last week I was going through the Cokesbury lobby, and Shirley Kirk was sitting on one of the chairs. I don't even know who was sitting next to you. But she stopped me and made a comment, and her comment got me to realize what trusting in God has always brought to me. She said, "David, you always seem full of joy." And it was like, oh, my trust my trust just like lets the joy well up from inside, regardless of what's happening in my life. Now, joy is different than happy, okay? I'm not always a happy guy, right, Carolee? See, okay? But there's this underlying current of joy that is always present, that I can always tap because I trust in God, because God is trustworthy. Say those last three words. God is trustworthy. Again, God is trustworthy. And so I'm always delighted then when I get to preach on this particular Sunday of the liturgical calendar, year C, like 33rd Sunday after Pentecost or whatever it is, because the Old Testament is always Isaiah 12, which I fell in love with before I even became a minister. When I was up in Western Vermont with my sister and we visited the Weston Priory, some monks up there, and they had a person who was very creative with song and was creating new songs for this new spirit moving through the Christian faith. The title of that song was Yahweh. And about 12 years ago, I actually sang it for you in the middle of my sermon. I'm not going to do that today. But I will recite the refrain. Yahweh is the God of my salvation. I trust in God and have no fear. I sing of the joy which God's love gives to me, and I draw deeply from the springs of God's great kindness. This trusting in God, because God is trustworthy, allows this joy to upwell, and I know I can go and always tap the well of God's waters to sustain me, to bring me some peace, to bring me some comfort, to bring me some insight, to bring me some hope, with that joy always sort of bubbling through it all. And so I thought about, when we go to God. Now, let me back up. How do we go to God? how do we begin to allow ourselves to find the means whereby we trust God? For me, some of my connectors are being out in the outdoors. A good walk outside, or sitting in our meditation room early in the morning and watching the birds out our windows. I am drawing deeply from the wells of God. For me, it's music. And I have appreciated the song selection that Rob has brought to the choir, and the fun and the waters of life that are welling up inside because of the songs. I think of how being a part of this community is a way that I tap the waters of life. And there are even times when I'm reading something theological, maybe a little heavy, when it suddenly opens up a little new insight into God or me or the world, or how to be in the world for God. It's like that also just kind of feeds my soul. There are so many ways, but we each need to know what it is for us that does that. Because life difficulties will come. For me, it's having a daughter who hasn't talked to me in 11 years, and I don't know if she'll ever talk to me again. So I go to the waters of God all the time. What might it be for you? Can you name one? Anybody want to name something? How about physical pain? I've got plantar fasciitis in my right heel. It's been there for 4 months. Doesn't seem to be going away. It keeps me from walking out in the world. So I go to God's waters to renew myself, to strengthen myself, to find joy even with this pain in my heel. I think about troubles in the world, conflicts, wars, everything else, how disheartening that can be, but I continue to go to God, to drink of God's waters. I think sometimes, and I know I'm a youngster compared to some of you, but getting older can be the pits, right? So we have to drink of God's waters to sustain us and to keep us alive and joyful. Sally, Carolee, and I say, you always have a sparkle in your eye. Like, watch out. What are you going to do next, huh? Shirley, partly. I said Sally, Shirley. See, getting old is no fun. But regardless of what it is, the waters of life are always there. Even if we think we have drunk so deep, there's nothing left. They keep coming and coming and coming. That will run out. God never runs out. To draw deeply from the springs of God's waters, we can trust they will always be there for us. God is ever trustworthy. God is ever present to refresh, renew, to re-energize us. God is ever present to comfort, strengthen, and soothe us. God is ever present to connect, unite, and send us forth. This isn't we get to have joy sitting on our seats saying, oh, life is wonderful. No, it's taking that joy out into the world so that people can see you and they may say, why are they so joyful? And they might suddenly get curious about you or about God so that they might come to trust God as well. God is ever present to connect us and unite us. I think I said that one. Just as the temple stones were thrown down from a building to reveal an ending, so stones are rolled away from tombs to bring new life and allow us to step out into the life we can have here and now. That's the Christ I follow. That's the God of life and water that I partake of deeply. And because I trust the waters of God's deep well, because I trust God to be with me always, how can I keep from singing? And that's our next hymn. May you join in with faith.